Teresa, thank you again for inviting me back to this. First of all, it's a pleasure being here with the fellow realtors. And secondly, every time I come here, I stare at the ceiling in this room, and I'm just blown away at how much work it must have taken to finish this beautiful ceiling. And I hope you all appreciate it like I do, because you ain't ever going to see this kind of craftsmanship ever, ever, ever again. So anyway, for all those reasons, thank you. I know we have a busy, Teresa Kinney is a very busy afternoon for all of you, so I've been held to 20 minutes. And being of Irish descent, this is like an Olympic event for me, so I'm going to do the very, very best I can to live up to my commitment to Teresa. So the Miami Report, what is this all about? Just by way of show of hands, how many here are not living in Miami these days? Okay. Well, I've got good news for you, and I got good news for people that are even living in Miami. If you give me 20 minutes, I promise you're going to know a lot more about Miami in 20 minutes than you did when you woke up this morning. And it doesn't matter whether you're from here or not. Let me explain what this is even all about. Miami Report, 2019. It was 2009 when the world kind of came to an end. And I produced with my partners this says, I know it's hard to read, this says September 2009. And the reason this came out of that old cliche, necessity is the mother of invention. And every one of you have practiced that for one reason or another in your life. Well, this was ours. And this is because the world came to an end in 2008. You might recall that Ford Motor Company and General Motors in Detroit were right on the verge of not just bankruptcy, but going out of business. You might remember names like Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers. Well, they did go out of business. I'm not jumping up and down about that whatsoever. My parents were born in the 20s. And as a little boy, all I ever heard about was the Great Depression of 1929 over and over and over again. Craigie, save your money. Because those folks that came from the Depression, they understood what 1929 meant. And it lingered for years. Well, guess what, folks? In 2008, you had your 1929. And my God, was it tough. In 2009, the New York Times and CNN wrote a story about Miami. They said that there were 25,000 condos that did not close. People who bought condos, call them investors, call them speculators, in 2002, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It took a while for those developers to finish the buildings, but then 2008 came. And 25,000 people defaulted on their condos, defaulted. That meant all those condos came back on the market. And according to the New York Times and CNN, it was 10 years of supply. 10 years. So for those of you that, like me, are in sales, you know this. You can never sell anything without a sense of urgency, right? Ever. The easiest way to create a sense of urgency, if you're new at this game, is to create a sense of scarcity. Teresa Kinney wants to buy that 3-bedroom apartment at Nativo, the project you just heard about, in downtown Miami, overlooking Government Cut. Well, guess what, Teresa? That 3-bedroom on the corner, it's the only one we have left. That's scarcity. And if you create scarcity, urgency is automatic. And with any luck at all, Teresa Kinney is the next homeowner at Nativo. How do you do that when the New York Times and CNN says there's 10 years of supply? I'm not that tall. I'm not that good. Nobody is. So we thought maybe it's time to close, because how do you create urgency against that? But then we said to ourselves, wait a minute, we live here. That doesn't make any sense. I think there were 25,000 condos that were built from 2000 till, say, 2008. But that doesn't mean they were all in default land. So we went out, neighborhood by neighborhood, from Coconut Grove to Fort Lauderdale, building by building, and we counted. And it took a while. Exactly how many condos defaulted. It was 11,500. So instead of saying that there was 10 years of inventory, ISG, we said that's 5 years of supply. That's still a lot of selling. With 11,000 over 5 years, that's 2,000 units a year. That's a lot of selling. Well, we were wrong. We were wrong. By 2 years from the publication of this in September of 2009, all that inventory was gone. Now, what's unique about that is 3 things, in my opinion. 1, we did it without American buyers. And we did it without American buyers because there was no mortgage money in 2009, 10, and 11. And the reason there was no mortgage money is because you couldn't get a decent appraisal because everybody said we were in a falling knife environment. Prices were dropping. Try getting an appraisal. So you had to rely on South America. South Americans, particularly Argentines, Brazilians, Venezuelans, Colombians, they came up here with, not literally, but suitcases of cash, no mortgages, and they bought everything in 2 years. In 2 years. Said a couple of things to me. Number one, don't ever doubt the popularity of Miami in South America, ever, ever. And number two, don't ever doubt the resiliency of Miami. This is the smallest big city in the world. I was in Bogota, Colombia about 6 months ago. I asked the folks down there, how many people live in Metro Bogota? The guesses were all over the place. 4 million, 5 million, 6 million. It's 8.5 million. I'll help you out. The metropolitan Sao Paulo population is 21 million. Metropolitan Mexico City, one of the biggest cities in the world, 22 million. For those of you not living in Miami, this may surprise you, but the population of Miami-Dade County, all of Miami-Dade County, is 2.7 million. We are the smallest big city in the world. We have this gigantic reputation. But that's how many people live here. Don't ever, ever, ever doubt the popularity of Miami. Well, my sales agent is getting back to this thing. Can you do a follow-up? And then can you do a follow-up? Next thing I know, I'm in the business of producing this for most of the agents that work for me, whether it's related to ISG or ISG, and now for the real estate community. And it's kind of interesting because I've been in this game for 26 years. That's how long I've owned ISG. And I represent some big players in Miami, so they give me their sales reports. Related, Swire, PMG, Terra. So all those, if you're not from here, those are the bigger players. Harvey Hernandez, those are the bigger players in town. They send me their sales reports. I summarize from their sales reports what's sold, what's not sold. So what you're about to see is not cocktail party conversation. You're about to see the real facts. Updated through September 30th, Q3 of this year. So here we go. We called this year's version of the Miami report, which was published in April, Supply Shock. And we called it Supply Shock because there's a lot of articles out there, and I'm not going to name every publication, I'm going to name one today, that get the facts wrong, but not by this much, by a lot. I don't know why they like to pick on Miami in terms of exaggerating the amount of inventory to sell, in terms of killing scarcity and urgency, but they do. So my job, in part, is to rearrange the facts. Here's one example, and it's contained within this, which you can get online at isgworld.com. This cycle began in 2012. The first Miami report was published in 2009. 2 years later, all that stuff was sold. And when all that inventory is sold, you know what developers do? They start developing again. There's a surprise. And in 2012, they started building. And from Coconut Grove to Fort Lauderdale, all east of 95, 20,000 condos got developed by the bigger players in town. Got developed. I published that in this report. In June of this year, just before 4th of July weekend, perfect timing, the Wall Street Journal, of all publications, look what they wrote. 20,000 new condos have been planned in the Miami area since the last downturn. You're late by about 8 years. That's not what we said at all. This is what's actually happened. We said there were close to 20,000, 19,859 condos got developed. As of September 30, 17,900, call it 18,000, are sold. They missed that completely. I didn't say they were planned. You know what's planned right now? My Christmas list. Nothing, which I will explain to you in a second. Give me a break. Halloween just passed. I'm always late on Christmas. I'm sure you are too. Let me go through the rest of this. 4 numbers I'd like you to pay attention to in my remaining 12 minutes. 1888. Of the 20,000 condos that got developed in this cycle from 2012 till now, the end of this cycle, that's what's left to be sold from Coconut Grove to Fort Lauderdale. And folks, slice and dice it neighborhood by neighborhood, building by building, it's like nothing. 2020, well, that would be next year, the start of a whole new decade. And that's the year that most developers, the big players, want to start the next cycle. They want to start, with the grace of God, the next cycle. But they've got one little problem, which I'll address in a second. 2025, if we could start the next cycle, one of the best in the business just walked in the room, Alicia Severa, and there she is. If Alicia, Craig, Fortune, Douglas Elliman, Sotheby's, Compass, if we all jumped in and started selling next year, if we all did, the fastest you can go to reach the pre-sale requirement would be 2 years. What's a pre-sale requirement? Well, in South Florida, like most cities in the United States, construction lenders require that developers sell half of their inventory, 50%, before they'll give a construction loan, and there's a shovel in the ground. That's going to take every bit of 2 years these days. Why is that? Well, when I moved here 30 years ago from New Jersey, a high-rise building was about 20 to 25 stories. They put a couple hundred units in there. It took about a year to reach the pre-sale. It took about 18 to 24 months to build. The life cycle of a baby is 9 months. The life cycle of a 25, 30-story building was 3 years. But we're not building 25, 30-story buildings anymore. We can't. The land costs are too damn expensive. The only thing that makes any sense for the developers is to go really, really high. And plus, because of this number, we're running out of land. No, we're building 40, 50, 80-story buildings. I have a client, Property Markets Group. They want to build the Waldorf Astoria, a condo with hotel residences in downtown Miami, 100 stories. That's the Empire State Building if you need perspective. No, we're not building 20-story buildings anymore. If you didn't know that, I don't blame you. You don't live in Miami. But for those of us that do, you know that we're bordered to the east by the Atlantic Ocean, and we're bordered to the west by what we call the sponge of Florida, the Everglades. It sucks up all that rainwater beautifully, organically, naturally. Those are two specific parameters we can never touch. And if this number holds true, the only way you can accommodate future growth is to go vertical. That is the daily population growth of the state of Florida, which is passed only by Texas, which grows by about 1,000 people a day. This is 902 people a day. Number 3 is California, 300 people a day. It used to be called the Big 3, now it's called the Big 2. So here's perspective on this cycle. No, Wall Street Journal, we didn't build 20,000. We weren't planning 20,000. We built almost 20,000, 90% are sold. That's all that's left. That's all that's left. You want to see the absorption schedule? The sales cycle? Since 2016, that's how many from this were left to be sold. And gradually, it's shrinking. And that's without the help of South America. In 2016, the US dollar went way up, trading at all-time highs around the world. The desire for South Americans to own property in Miami is huge. The affordability is the problem. In 2012, by example, 2.5 Brazilian reais bought 1 US dollar. This morning, that was 4 Brazilian reais buys 1 US dollar. It's too damn expensive. It's not that they don't want it. They're waiting for the dollar to devalue. A lot of people around the world are waiting for the dollar to devalue. We're off South America by probably 75% easily, strictly because of the dollar, not because of desirability. So how have we been doing this? How have all these developers, you put them in one bag, been absorbing 1,234 units a year? That's domestic demand for the most part. People are moving to Florida. People are moving to Miami. If you do some simple math, this divided by that number, it's 18 months of supply. Not so fast. We took a look at it. Within that number, almost half or $2 million or less. Based on the actual sales for the last few years, that's a year. If you have a client that wants to buy a brand new condo, they have 1 year, 2 million or less. 2 million to 3 million, 18 to 24 months. 3 million and up, probably 3 years. Probably 3 years. Now, why do we call this, though, supply shock? I just explained to you that the South American demand is way off because of the high dollar. So it's affected the brokers in this room that are always trying to sell South American families. How has it affected developers? As I said earlier, I'm from New Jersey. It's hard to sell an American, a gringo like me, pre-construction. We don't want to wait. I think we're into immediate gratification. I'll buy something that's under construction, certainly something that's finished. You're asking me to wait almost 5 years? Because the life cycle of a 20-story building was 3. The life cycle of anything over 60 stories is 5 to 6 before anybody can move in. The shock is about to hit you. This is how it affected developers. The people that love to buy pre-construction are mostly from South America, but they can't get their money out right now, not because they can't, they won't because the dollar's high. Look at groundbreakings of condos. This was 2012. This is 2013. Hell, 2014 was a hell of a fun year. 23 high-rise condos broke ground between Coconut Grove and Fort Lauderdale. That was a hell of a lot of fun. This is all contained within those 20,000 units. All the way to this year, 5. 5. Folks, I'll spare you where these are. In South Florida, that's like 0. And the only one that we know of that could possibly break ground next year is Nativo. 1 project. 1. Because of that damn dollar. And that's why this is in part called supply shock. Want to see it another way? From the year 2000 to 2008, developers built and sold 27,500 condos. In this past decade, we've already covered this number a few times, now we're going to do it again. From 2012 right till today, almost 20,000. That's 47,500 condos got built and delivered, and with the exception of 1,800 sold. We're going into the next decade with Nativo, with 400 plus condos in a market that's starving for supply very soon because of organic population demand. Let me show you in my remaining few minutes. I already talked about the life cycle. I got to go quickly because I'm on a time frame. This basically shows, well, actually, there's another way of doing this. Let me go through this because I am running out of time. I want to make this point. This is the stronger point. I share this with the people that work for me all the time. I want you to consider condo supply. I know this sounds rather elementary, but bear with me. Like 2 planets spinning in the solar system, okay? This is developer inventory, and this is MLS resale. Well, it only makes common sense that if this planet, developer inventory, is starting to run out of supply, it will slow down. This should accelerate MLS. Should, right? Since this is the only place people can find shelter, especially those that are moving here. Well, is that true? All condominium inventory in Miami and Fort Lauderdale at every single price point went into this shopping bag on May 1. Almost 21,000 condos, every price point. October 1, 19,500. Went down. We added 11,500, but we sold nearly 13,000. MLS inventory is starting to drop. We developers can't build new supply very time soon because of the high dollar and the underwriting guidelines from construction lenders. Is that happening just with condos? What about houses? Well, here's houses. 13,000 single-family homes. Every price point was on the market on May 1. October 1, the difference is 1,600, but look what we added, 15,000 went into MLS. Over 17,000 came out of MLS, sold. So you tell me what may become of the price, and part of it is being driven by this. It's being driven by 2 factors. Mortgage rates, and what it may be a little known fact to a lot of people, the population boom that we're all going through. Mortgage rates. Whoever thought you'd see rates this low? I have mortgage lenders that are telling me you can expect 30-year fixed rate loans below 3% next year. It's heading that way. It's tied to the 10-year bond. If you're paying any attention to that, you know there's a lot of validity to a statement like that. There you go. This is where it was in 18, now where we think it's heading by next year. Demand, in my remaining few minutes. There's a lot of people in the world that like to talk about supply. This one's an expert, that one's an expert. Hell, I guess I consider myself one too, but very few people talk about demand. Where do the buyers come from? Well, I talked about South America during my brief presentation. Let's talk about domestic demand, and let me trend it for you. 20 years ago, 1998, fastest growing state in the country was California. 1,380 people every day, every day. Texas number 2 at 884, Florida at 823. Look at New York, plus 580 a day. Well, 20 years later, California dropped from 1 to 342 a day. Texas went up to 1,000, no state income tax. Florida went from 823 to 902, no state income tax. Look at what happened to New York. Last year, minus 132 a day. This year, that number is expected to double. Connecticut is in red territory. Illinois is in red territory, and this year, New Jersey and Massachusetts are supposed to follow. Call them tax refugees, if you'd like. I often wondered when Donald Trump got elected, this is going to be really good news for us realtors because it's the first time we ever had a former real estate developer in the Oval Office. And I've been wondering when I'm going to get that big thunderous pound from that. Haven't really seen it, I don't know about you, but for the December 2017 Tax Reform Act. It took away the state and local tax deductions. I'm sure you heard about that. And in part, it's driving this. The newest resident of Florida is, in fact, Donald Trump. Big news a month ago was Carl Icahn, a big hedge fund owner in New York City. He's moved his entire operation to Miami. You know, they used to call them the big three, California, Texas, and Florida. Now it's Texas and Florida. 902 people a day. Realtors ask me all the time, what does that mean to me? I'm a realtor in Miami. I'll show you. 45% of 902 come to what we all call South Florida. Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and Palm Beach. Yes, 25% comes to Miami-Dade every single day. That's between 200 and 220 people every single day looking for shelter. You want to know why Mls Inventories Dropping? I already explained to you why developers can't build right now. They can't. By the time a new condominium could possibly be developed and delivered as fast and as good as Alicia Severa is, by example, there's no way she's going to be able to hand the keys to anybody until 2025. So if this trend of 902 a day, combined with low mortgage rates, should continue, not because I want it to, but I really do want it to, as do a lot of realtors in South Florida. What becomes the value of residential real estate? We can't add supply. In about a year, year and a half, well, you now know, your customers are going to know. There's no supply out there. What happens to prices if mortgage rates continue to drop? When I read this stuff, that there's 3 years of inventory and 5 years of inventory, I know they're completely ignoring demand. Completely ignoring. They're also ignoring some of the changing conditions in South America, like Mexico and Argentina that just elected leftist governments, which will supersede what's going on with the dollar. I'm going to close with this slide. A couple minutes over, sorry. I am quoting my friends from the Wall Street Journal, but I found this interesting as can be. Remember Instagram challenge earlier this year? What'd you look like 10 years ago, Danny? What do you look like today? Remember that? I didn't take the bait. Florida became a $1 trillion economy about a year ago. If Florida was a country, forget about it being one of the 50 states. If it was a country, 10 years ago in 2008, when Dan Gatta didn't have any gray hair, we were 52nd most important economy in the world. Florida. It's not just condos and houses. There's a lot more going on in Florida than just real estate. 10 years later, if we were a country, the U.S. Census Bureau says that for the next 20 years, the daily population of Florida will continue between 900 and 1,000 people a day. So if that stat holds up, in 2028, when Dan Gatta is completely gray, where will we be? With that kind of a growth, this sort of a delta in the last 10 years. Now, folks, Florida is as strong as ever, no matter what you may read in any of these crazy tabloid publications about all this real estate to sell. I'm wondering where all the real estate is coming to fill the demand. And I'm really particularly happy that I find myself in the right place at the right time, as most realtors in South Florida should feel. With that said, thank you for your time and attention.